The humans saved her people, but she was the one to save him. The crimson skies of Velthara burned with the light of 3 dying suns as Zara pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the underground bunker. Her silver skin shimmered with fear, and her large violet eyes scanned the darkness for any sign of the destroyer ships that had been hunting her people for weeks. Captain Jake Miller of the Earth Defense Force had been tracking the distress signals for 3 days across the outer rim of the galaxy. His ship, the Phoenix, cut through space like a blade as he followed the weak transmissions that seemed to come from nowhere. The signals were unlike anything human technology had encountered before, but something deep in his gut told him to keep following them. Zara belonged to the Velthani, a peaceful race of telepathic beings who had lived in harmony with their dying planet for thousands of years. Their cities were built deep underground to protect them from the harsh radiation of their 3 suns, but now even their safest shelters offered no protection from the mechanical monsters that had come from the void. The destroyers were ancient machines left behind by a long-dead civilization programmed to eliminate any species that showed signs of psychic abilities. They had found the Velthani and marked them for extinction. The silver-skinned people had no weapons, no ships, and no way to fight back against the relentless metal swarms that poured from the sky like deadly rain. Jake had been searching for anything that might give his life meaning after losing his entire squad in the Battle of Europa. 6 months had passed since he watched his friends die in the cold vacuum of space, and he had volunteered for every dangerous solo mission since then, hoping to find either glory or death among the stars. Instead, he found something he never expected to find again: hope when his sensors finally locked onto the source of the distress signals. Jake saw a planet that looked like it was bleeding. The surface was scarred with massive craters and the atmosphere glowed with the light of burning cities. His ship detected thousands of life forms hiding deep underground, but also something else: massive mechanical signatures moving across the surface like a plague of metal locusts. Zara felt the human mind touch the edge of her consciousness, long before his ship entered their atmosphere. Human thoughts were different from Velthani thoughts. They burned bright and fierce like tiny stars instead of flowing like gentle rivers. She had never encountered a species that thought with such intensity, such raw emotion, and such stubborn determination to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. The Phoenix landed in a crater that had once been the capital city of New Velthara. Jake stepped out in his combat suit and immediately felt the psychic pressure of thousands of terrified minds pressing against his consciousness. The sensation was overwhelming but not unpleasant, like being surrounded by warm whispers in a language he almost understood. He made his way toward the strongest signal coming from deep beneath the ruins of what looked like it had been a beautiful crystal tower. Zara watched him through the underground sensors as he fought his way past the destroyer patrol units that swarmed the surface. His movements were precise and deadly, but she could feel something broken in his mind, something that made him fight, like he had nothing left to lose. When Jake finally reached the bunker entrance, Zara was waiting for him. Her silver skin reflected the emergency lighting like liquid mercury, and her violet eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. She was tall and graceful with features that were almost human, but touched with an otherworldly beauty that took his breath away. She spoke to him without words, her thoughts flowing directly into his mind like music. "You came," she said, and he could hear the wonder in her mental voice. "You heard our call across the void, and you came even though you do not know us." Jake felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he had not experienced since his friends died. "I heard," she said, and found himself responding with thoughts instead of words I could not ignore. Your pain, Zara, led him deeper into the bunker where thousands of her people huddled in the darkness. They were a beautiful race, with skin that ranged from silver to pale blue and eyes like precious stones, but Jake could see the fear and desperation in every face. The children clung to their parents, and the adults whispered prayers to gods that seemed to have abandoned them. The destroyer fleet consisted of 12 massive ships, each one the size of a small moon. They had been systematically destroying every settlement on the surface, and their ground units were slowly working their way through the underground tunnel systems. It was only a matter of days before they found the main bunker and completed their mission of extinction. Jake studied the tactical displays that the Velthani had managed to cobble together from salvaged equipment. The destroyers were incredibly advanced, but they followed predictable patterns. They were machines, after all, programmed to be efficient rather than creative. He began to see possibilities that the peaceful Velthani had missed. "You fight," she said, reading his thoughts as he studied their defenses. "You have seen war and death, and still you choose to stand against impossible odds. Why do humans do this? Why do you throw yourselves against forces that should destroy you?" Jake looked at her, and for the first time in months he smiled. Because sometimes impossible odds are the only ones worth facing. Because someone has to stand up and say no to the darkness. Because if we do not fight for what is right, then we are not worthy of the gift of life. Over the next 2 days, Jake worked with the Velthani engineers to modify their underground systems into weapons. The peaceful people had never built instruments of war, but they had incredible technology for mining and construction. Jake showed them how to turn their industrial tools into something that could hurt the way. Machines that hunted them. Zara stayed by his side, translating his tactical knowledge into concepts her people could understand. She began to see why humans had spread across the galaxy despite being one of the younger races they did not accept. Defeat they adapted and overcame. They found ways to turn their weaknesses into strengths and their desperation into determination. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. They would collapse the tunnel systems in a specific pattern that would channel the destroyer ground units into a series of kill zones where modified mining equipment could tear them apart. At the same time, Jake would take a small team to the surface and use captured destroyer technology to disable the command ship. It was a plan that required perfect timing, flawless coordination, and more luck than any sane person would count on. Jake had led similar missions before, and he knew that most of the people involved would not survive. But the Velthani were facing extinction anyway, and this gave them a chance to die fighting instead of cowering in the dark. Zara insisted on joining the surface team. Despite Jake's protests, she was the most powerful telepath among her people, and her abilities would be crucial for coordinating the underground assault. Jake tried to argue that she was too important to risk, but she silenced him with a look that could have melted steel. "You saved my people," she told him, "but I will not let you face this alone. You carry too much pain from your lost friends, and it will destroy you if you try to be a hero again. Let me share this burden with you. Let me help you find something worth living for, instead of something worth dying for." The assault began at dawn when the 3 suns aligned and cast the longest shadows. The underground teams began their carefully orchestrated collapse of the tunnel systems, while Jake and Zara led a dozen volunteers across the scarred surface toward the nearest destroyer command unit. The fighting was brutal and desperate. Jake moved like a man possessed, cutting through mechanical defenders with weapons that should not have been able to penetrate their armor. But Zara was there in his mind, guiding his shots and warning him of attacks before they came. Her presence was like a warm light in the darkness of combat. They reached the command unit, and Jake began the delicate process of hacking into its control systems, while Zara held off the defenders with telekinetic barriers that turned their own weapons against them. The countdown had begun, and they had minutes before the underground assault would either succeed or fail. Catastrophically, the hack worked, but at a terrible cost. The command unit's destruction triggered a feedback pulse that caught both Jake and Zara in its blast. Jake felt his mind fragmenting as alien technology tore through his consciousness, but Zara was there, catching the pieces and holding them together with her own thoughts. When the light faded, Jake found himself lying on the ground with Zara's arms around him. Her silver skin was now marked with burns from the energy discharge, and her violet eyes were dim with exhaustion. But she was smiling. The destroyer fleet was retreating there. Command structure disrupted and their ground forces scattered. The Velthani had survived, but the cost had been enormous. Half their population was gone and their world was dying. Jake offered to take the survivors to human space where they could find new worlds and rebuild their civilization. But Zara made a different choice. She chose to stay with Jake not because her people needed her, but because he did. She had seen into his soul during the battle and found a man who had forgotten how to live for himself instead of for others. She became his partner in the years that followed, traveling the galaxy and fighting the darkness wherever they found it. Together they saved dozens of worlds and countless